Well, long before we knew the names Uvalde, Pulse nightclub, Parkland, and Sandy Hook, the nation was stunned and horrified by the Long Island Railroad Massacre. It happened 30 years ago next week and was among the first public mass shootings in our country. This Friday, CBS New York will premiere an hour-long documentary looking back at the tragedy, a shooting on an LIRR train that killed 6 people and injured 19 others. Here's a quick look.
Active shooter cases were being manifested at that time.
He just had that look in his eyes.
And I dropped to the floor.
How can I ever forgive you?
I'm sorry.
It really never ends for family members of the victims.
Just wake up. It's another shooting.
I wouldn't want to be in his shoes.
It was horrible. It was a massacre.
And CBS News' Carolyn Gusoff directed and produced the 533 Legacy of the LIRR Massacre and joins us now. Carolyn, good to see you here.
Good to see you, Chris.
I can't believe it's been 30 years. What was it like looking back at what we mentioned a few moments ago, one of the nation's really first mass shootings?
Well, when we first started to talk about the fact that it was a 30-year anniversary and maybe creating a documentary, my first reaction was sort of, it's been told. You know, I was there, I covered the shooting, I covered every day of the trial, kind of what's left to be told. But when I started to go through what's still very compelling archival video of a very unique situation, the question then became, you know, why should this be remembered? And I started interviewing some of the 17 people, including survivors, attorneys, and there was this universal feeling that so little has been done, and, you know, how far we have come. We have not come very far in terms of gun violence and mental health. And these folks, you know, before we even had a name for it, active shooter, you know, wanted their stories retold and the victims to be remembered. I mean, it was a bizarre case, aside from the tragic element as it started to unfold, especially with Colin Ferguson, the gunman, again acting as his own defense, on his own defense rather, questioning court victims. We have a clip. Let's just show a clip real quick.
Colin Ferguson was in fact a well-meaning passenger on the train. Like any other passenger, he dozed off, having the weapon in a bag.
You were holding it in both hands. Like this.
Were you exposed to the shooting at the...
It was so bizarre thinking back and watching that testimony and watching how it almost made a tragedy into this circus-like environment.
It was truly theater of the absurd. And in reaching out to survivors, I mean, after 30 years, you can imagine they're scattered all over the country. It's not that easy to find them. Some wanted to go on with their lives and not look back, but many of them did want to speak about where we are 30 years later. And, you know, that the fact that Colin Ferguson defended himself and, you know, claimed he was a sleeping commuter who fell asleep on the plane and, pardon me, on the train, and someone, you know, stole his gun. It just put these survivors through torment. You know, they were not only shot, people died, 6 people died, but then they were really tormented.
Could they believe that this was actually, I mean, this is like, we've heard about this in subsequent cases of people who've been accused basically being their own attorneys in court. But back then it must have seemed like such a foreign concept that someone who could even do something like this and get away with it. Yeah, it was unthinkable, and it drew a tremendous amount of media attention at the time. And, you know, he got more than his 15 minutes of fame. I mean, Colin Ferguson really extended the hurt. And we also spoke with the jury foreman who talked about that. Yes. What was it like for him? Well, first of all, Delton Dove was a young man when he was chosen jury foreman in this case. And, you know, we speak to him 30 years later, really in his first extensive interview about the case. And, you know, he tells me that he was glad that it was he was glad that he was a black man on this jury to determine the fate of another black man. But he realized right away, as, you know, one after the other witnesses, victims said, "You shot me. What's left to hear?" So he was a very, you know, a poignant interview all these years later to hear from him and about the scars he bears. You talked about kind of how we've come so far, but we really haven't come so far with the inaction of Congress to make significant gun law changes over the years. I think we all kind of felt after Sandy Hook, if nothing could get done after that, well, then nothing's getting done. Carolyn McCarthy, who obviously was closely related to this tragedy, ends up being a member of Congress. She ends up just kind of stepping away because she just felt, you know what, look, after all these years in Congress, I still can't even get anything done here.
It was very important that Carolyn McCarthy participate in this documentary. Obviously, she lost her husband. Her son was gravely injured. And she spoke to us very poignantly about how, you know, she, in the end, could no longer face victims' families. You know, after Sandy Hook, if nothing could be done in Congress, she felt it was up to the next generation to carry this mantle. So I was very grateful for her participation. All these years later, she's spoken about gun violence her entire life and feels that, you know, we've almost gone nowhere.
Yeah. Quick, before I do let you go, there is a life-affirming message in this documentary?
Absolutely. I mean, survivors have gone on and, you know, lived very grateful lives. People who lost loved ones work towards change, and they all want these names, these victims, not to just blur together in an endless series of mass shootings. You know, they want to refocus on, you know, what this country could do better since December 7th, 1993.
You would hope somebody in a position of power would finally get the message. Just for some reason, it doesn't seem to happen. But Carolyn, thank you very much for bringing this to us. We really appreciate it. The documentary 533, Legacy of the LIRR Massacre, airs this Friday, December 1st at 8 p.m. You can watch it on WLNY channel 1055 and, of course, streaming right here on CBS News New York.